Hi there. So let's do another chapter. We're on chapter 29 of Baron's Marvelous Underground Journey. We're very near the end. Maybe we'll finish it tomorrow and be able to start another book. Okay, so let's head over to the book. There we go. And we'll begin. As Bullierain had once remarked, when there are many doors, it's a wise man who knows which is the right one to open. And this I found to be the case when he attempted to make my departure from the icy domain of his frigid majesty, Gelidus, king of the Colticorps, for there was a baker's dozen of galleries in each of which, upon exploring it, I came, after a tramp of half a mile or so, up against a lofty gate of solid ice, curiously carved and fitting the end of the gallery as corked as a bottle. No doubt you are wondering why I didn't make my way out of the Colticorps kingdom by the flowing river. For the very good reason that it went no farther than King Gelidus' domain, emptying into a vast reservoir which apparently had a subterranean outlet, for its thick covering of ice always remained at the same height. The king's quarrymen were ordered to hew an opening through whichever door I should point out as the one I wished to pass through. But I was informed by Frostofritz, according to the law of the land, but one door could be opened during any 1 year, so that if I found my way blocked and turned back again, it would mean a delay of 12 months. Bullierain, with all his wisdom, was powerless to assist me, although I was half inclined to think that he might have done so had he been permitted to investigate the secret records of the kingdom carved upon the huge tablets of ice and stored away in the vaults of the palace. The fact of the matter is, King Gelidus was so desirous of having me assist at the marriage feast of Princess Sneeball that he threw every obstacle in my way that he could, without openly showing his hand, and Sneeball herself, by the dancing of her clear gray eyes, gave me to understand that she, too, was hoping that I would make a mistake when I came to point out the door which I wanted opened. Bolger saw that I was in trouble, but couldn't comprehend clearly what the trouble was. He kept his eyes fastened upon me, however, watching my every movement, hoping, no doubt, to solve the mystery. While sitting one day lost in thought over the very serious problem which I found myself called upon to solve, an idea struck me. I had noticed that in the meat quarries the workmen often made use of sounding rods, which were long pieces of polished bone, ending in flint tips. A Colticorpian quarryman, by dexterously twisting this rod, was able to bore a hole 6 feet deep or more into the solid bed of ice when desirous of ascertaining the position of a carcass in the meat quarry. And it occurred to me that by piercing the portals of ice which close the various corridors I have spoken of, possibly Bolger's keen scent might recognize a current of air which would have in it the odor of earth and rock. In other words, make a choice for me of the portal which opened on that corridor, leading away from the icy domain of King Gelidus, and not merely into some outlying chamber of his kingdom. His frigid majesty could not object to such experiments, for the law only forbade the hewing of openings large enough for the hewer to pass through. There you go. And there they are. Colticorpian quarrymen hewing a passage through the wall of ice. King Gelidus and half a dozen of his courtiers, looking stern and frigid and conversing in freezing tones, were present to see the experiment tried. Methought their icy lips clacked together with satisfaction when, at my request, one portal after another was pierced. But Bolger, after sniffing at the hole, turned away with a bewildered look in his eyes, as if he didn't understand why I was ordering him to thrust his warm nose into such odd places. And so we tramped from corridor to corridor until the quarrymen began to show signs of fatigue, and the sounding rod turned slower and slower in their hands. Frosty Fizz blinked his cold gray eyes, as much to say, "Little Baron, thou must bide with us for another year." But I merely turned to the quarrymen and ordered them to pierce one more portal of ice ere we abandoned the task for the day. They went at their work, piercing the 11th door with the pace of pack mules upon a mountainside, but at last the sounding rod bored a way through. In a wave of my hand the quarryman fell back. In an instant Bolger had his nose at the hole. It took 3 or 4 quick nervous sniffs, ending with a long, deep, drawn one, and then breaking out into a string of sharp, jerky, joyful barks, he began scratching furiously at the bottom of the portal. "Your frigid majesty," said I, with a low and stately bend in my body, such as only those born to the manner can make, "by this portal, at the coming of tomorrow's sun, I shall pass from your majesty's icy dominion." And when Frody Frisk and Glacier Boy heard these words of mine uttered so loftily, their eyes gleamed cold as steel, Then they followed the king in silence back to the palace of ice. Schneebel met them in the grand hallway, and when she looked upon their faces she began to weep, for she loved me, and she loved Bulger too, and her cold little heart could not bear the thought of our going. King Gelidus, however, soon recovered his spirits and ordered a feast with song and dance in honor of Bulger, who during the festivities sat at the highest divan with the softest pelt beneath him. And so many were the frozen tidbits which the Koltukers presented to him during the progress of the feast that I grew alarmed lest he might overload his stomach and not be in fit condition to make the early start on our journey, of which I had given notice to the Koltukorpian monarch. But his good sense saved him from doing so foolish a thing. In fact, I was greatly amused to see that, while he accepted every tidbit handed to him and solemnly went through the motions of chewing it, yet watching his chance he slyly dropped it out of his mouth and flirted it aside with his paw. Thus he spent our last night within the icy court of his frigid majesty. On the morrow, Koltukers collected in the great crowds on the different terraces to say goodbye. I pressed a kiss on the cheek of Princess Schneebel, and when it had turned to ice crystals, one of her men brushed it into an alabaster box. Prince Chili Chops, the former lamp trimmer, Prince Chili Chops, was on hand with the rest of the Koltukorpian nobles. But I flattered myself that Schneebel loved me better than she did him. However, I wished him joy and gripped his cold palm with such warmth that he stood blowing on it for a whole minute. When we reached the lofty portal, we found that the quarrymen had already hewn a passage through, and near by I observed the pile of massive blocks of ice, crystal clear. These, when Bulger and I should pass through the opening, were to be used to wall it up again. And when I saw this pile of blocks, I remembered the solid workmanship of the Koltukorpian quarrymen. The thought flitted through my mind, suppose Bulger had not chosen wisely. What use would there be turning back, for my own weak hands would be powerless against a wall built of such blocks? And I knock ever so loud, how could that sound ever traverse this long and winding corridor and reach the ear of a Koltukorp? No, I said to myself, if Bulger has not chosen wisely, it would be a good by both upper and under worlds. And then, bearing an alabaster lamp in one hand and the other holding the cord which I had tied to Bulger's collar, stepped through the narrow passage hewn by the quarrymen. I turned my back forever on the cold dominion of Gelidus, king of the Koltukorps. Once I halted and looked back. I could see nothing, but I could hear the sharp click of the flint axes, and the quarrymen closed up the door that shut me out from so many cold but loving hearts. And then I drew a long breath and went on my way again, and that was the last I ever saw of the Koltukorps, save in a daydream or night vision. Well, so that's chapter 29, and we'll probably finish this book tomorrow, do all three, 30, 31, and 32, either in one or two sessions. But I'm anxious to hear the end, aren't you? So stay tuned. Catch up on any of you missed. When this book is finished, it will be forever on my YouTube channel on a playlist called Baron's Trump's Marvelous Underground Journey. And you could listen to it from the very beginning. It'll all be there. All right. Until next time, we'll see you. Keep reading.